A Category 5 hurricane advances toward the airport with 280 km/h winds. The last 737 on the runway carries 189 passengers and needs to take off before the storm makes operations impossible. The captain has only 3 minutes to make the most difficult decision of his career: risk takeoff in extreme conditions or condemn everyone to face the hurricane on the ground. Between violent gusts, tower pressure, and growing panic in the cabin, every second could mean the difference between salvation and catastrophe. When the control tower announced we had 3 minutes before the hurricane hit the airport, I felt my stomach freeze. Behind me, 189 people awaited the decision that would change their lives forever. Winds were already hitting 180 km/h and increasing every second. I had two choices: risk a takeoff that could kill us or stay on the ground and face a Category 5 monster. There was no time to doubt. There was no margin for error. My name is Robert, and that September day I was commanding a Boeing 737-800 in the Caribbean. Hurricane season had been relatively calm up to that point, and our company maintained normal operations in the region. I had 15 years of experience, over 8,000 flight hours, and had faced severe storms before. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for what was about to happen. The morning started quiet. Our flight was scheduled to depart at noon, heading to an international hub. It was a route I knew well, a journey of approximately 3 hours over the ocean. During the morning briefing, the meteorologist mentioned a tropical depression forming about 800 kilometers off the coast, but the forecast indicated it would move west, away from our route. Confident, I headed to the airport. My co-pilot, David, was a promising young guy with 4 years of experience. We talked about everyday things while doing the pre-flight check. The aircraft was spotless, systems functioning perfectly. Passengers began boarding promptly at 11 o'clock. They were tourists returning home, local families, executives, regular people who trusted us to get them home safely. At 11:30, when we'd already completed boarding and closed the doors, we received the first alarming weather update. The tropical depression had intensified dramatically over the past 2 hours. It was now a Category 3 hurricane with 200 km/h winds, and its trajectory had changed unexpectedly. It was heading straight for us. I looked out the cockpit window and still saw blue sky with some scattered clouds. It seemed impossible that a devastating storm was approaching, but the meteorologists were clear. We had a window of approximately 2 hours before conditions deteriorated completely. The control tower issued a recommendation: all aircraft should take off immediately or seek shelter in reinforced hangars. The problem was there were 7 planes in the takeoff queue ahead of us. Each one would take about 10 minutes to be cleared, position, and depart. I did the math mentally and didn't like the result. I requested priority clearance, but we were informed all flights were in the same emergency situation. It was first come, first served, no exceptions. While we waited in line, I watched the horizon begin to change. A dark, sinister line appeared in the distance, advancing with terrifying speed. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze, began to gain strength. The first planes took off without problems, but with each passing minute, conditions worsened visibly. If you're enjoying this real story from the skies, subscribe to the Black Box channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next accounts from pilots who lived the impossible. When it was finally our turn to position at the runway threshold, the situation had changed drastically. The sky was overtaken by black, dense clouds that seemed to swallow daylight. Wind was already registering gusts of 140 km/h, way above the recommended operational limits for takeoff. The control tower informed us this would be the last flight authorized to depart. After us, the airport would be closed indefinitely. David looked at me with an expression mixing fear and confidence. He knew the final decision was mine, but he also knew there were no good options. I took a deep breath and assessed the situation. Through the window, I saw airport employees running for shelter. Loose equipment was starting to be dragged by the wind. A wheelchair flew past the runway like it was made of paper. At that moment, I received the update that changed everything. The hurricane had intensified again. Now it was Category 5, with sustained winds of 280 km/h and gusts that could exceed 320 km/h. Worse still, its displacement speed had increased. It would hit the airport not in 2 hours, but in less than 15 minutes. I felt my blood run cold. I looked at the weather radar and saw the giant rotating mass approaching. It was like watching a living monster coming in our direction, relentless and devastating. The decision had to be made immediately. Staying on the ground meant exposing 189 people to the fury of one of nature's most destructive phenomena. The nearest hangar was 10 minutes of taxi away, and there was no guarantee we'd get there before the storm hit. The option was to take off. But taking off meant facing brutal crosswinds, wind shear, extreme turbulence, and near-zero visibility. The aircraft's operating manuals established clear limits, and we were way beyond them. Technically, we shouldn't even try. I grabbed the microphone and made an announcement to the passengers. My voice was calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a serious weather situation approaching. We're going to take off immediately in challenging conditions. I ask that you remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened and follow all crew instructions. We'll do everything possible to get you home safely." I didn't mention we were about to attempt something no manual would recommend. I didn't talk about the hurricanes category or the winds about to hit us. They needed confidence, not panic. The tower gave us immediate clearance for takeoff. The controller, whose voice was usually professional and neutral, couldn't hide the tension. "Flight cleared for takeoff, runway 32. May God be with you." Those were the last words we heard from him before we lost communication. I pushed the throttles forward. The 737-800's CFM56 engines roared with their 27,000 pounds of thrust each. The aircraft, heavy with fuel for 3 hours of flight and 189 souls on board, began to accelerate. I immediately felt the first violent gust hit the plane from the side. The aircraft tilted brutally to the right. I compensated with rudder pedals and the yoke, fighting to maintain alignment with the runway. David called out the speeds. 80 knots, it's 100 knots, 120 knots. His voice was steady, but I could feel the tension in it. Every second, stronger gusts hit us. The plane shook and swayed like it was on a dirt road. Objects began hitting the fuselage. Branches, debris, things the wind was tearing from everything around us. "V1, David announced decision speed. There was no turning back now. We were committed to takeoff. If something went wrong now, we couldn't abort safely. It was takeoff or crash at the end of the runway. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to burst out of my chest, but my hands remained steady on the controls. "Rotate." The exact moment I pulled back on the yoke to raise the nose, a monstrous gust hit the aircraft. The plane literally jumped off the runway uncontrollably, climbing much faster than normal. For one terrible second, I completely lost control. We were being hurled upward like a leaf in the wind. The angle of attack excess alarm sounded. The stick shaker, the device that vibrates the yoke to warn of possible loss of lift, activated violently in my hands. The aircraft was at a dangerous angle, about to stall right after takeoff at just 50 feet off the ground. If we stalled now, we'd drop like a rock, and there wasn't enough altitude to recover. I pushed the yoke forward with controlled force, lowering the nose aggressively. It was against all instincts. You just took off and you're pushing the plane back down. But it was the only way to regain speed and avoid the stall. For 3 eternal seconds, we flew parallel to the ground, gaining speed while another gust pushed us sideways. The right wing dropped dramatically. I looked out the window and saw the ground approaching at a terrifying angle. I applied full left aileron and rudder to compensate. The aircraft responded, but with agonizing slowness. We were at just 30 feet off the ground, banked 40 degrees, when finally the wing started coming back up. "Gear up," I yelled to David. We needed all the aerodynamics we could get. He hit the lever and I heard the comforting sound of the wheels retracting. Every bit of drag we removed was crucial at that moment, but the battle was just beginning. As soon as we gained a few meters of altitude, we entered the base of the clouds. The turbulence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just bumps. It was as if giant invisible hands grabbed the plane and tried to rip it from the sky. One second we'd climb 500 feet, the next we'd drop 300. The vertical speed indicator oscillated violently between plus and minus 3,000 feet per minute. Behind us I could hear passengers screaming. The flight attendants tried to calm them, but their own voices were loaded with fear. A veteran flight attendant named Jennifer managed to reach the interphone and informed me that luggage had fallen from overhead bins. An oxygen mask had accidentally deployed, and several passengers were vomiting due to the extreme turbulence. But miraculously, no one had been seriously injured up to that point. I kept the plane climbing, fighting every gust. The autopilot was useless in these conditions. It disconnected every few seconds due to excessive turbulence. It was pure manual flying, every second demanding corrections, every instant requiring quick decisions. My hands were sweating inside the gloves, my muscles starting to burn from the constant effort on the controls. David monitored the instruments and aircraft systems, while I concentrated on keeping the plane flying. He was my guardian angel that day, anticipating problems, checking speeds, confirming our trajectory. Communication between us was minimal, only the essentials, but every word had the weight of gold. When we reached 8,000 feet, I thought the worst was over. Normally, at that altitude, we'd already be above most turbulence, but I was wrong. The hurricane was intensifying below us, and its influence reached much higher altitudes than normal. The clouds around us weren't white and fluffy. They were black, dense, electrically charged. Lightning cut through the sky in all directions, some frighteningly close. A blinding flash filled the cockpit, followed instantly by a deafening boom. We were struck by lightning. The instruments flickered, alarms went off. The smell of ozone filled the air. My heart stopped for a second as I quickly checked the critical systems. The engines continued functioning normally. Flight controls responded, but we'd lost one of our radio systems and part of the redundant instrumentation. "Are we okay?" David asked, his voice finally showing the fear he'd been holding in. "We're flying," I replied, and at that moment that was all that mattered. "Keep monitoring the systems. We need to get out of this storm." But getting out wouldn't be easy. The weather radar showed red in all directions, the indication of severe weather. We were literally inside the hurricane, not in the calm center, but in the wall of rotating clouds surrounding it. Every escape route seemed blocked by intense storm cells. Is this story keeping you on the edge of your seat? Share this video with someone who needs to know the reality of the challenges pilots face. And don't forget to hit that like button. At 12,000 feet, what I feared most happened. The right engine ingested enough water to cause momentary instability. Power dropped dramatically, and the N1 indicator, the engine's fan rotation, plunged to 60%. The plane yawed violently to the right. I immediately compensated with left rudder, while David already had his hand on the emergency procedures manual. "Possible flame out on engine 2, he announced, referring to the extinction of combustion in the engine. My mind raced through all the procedures. With one engine, we could still fly, but our ability to climb would be severely limited, and we needed to climb. It was our only chance to get out of the storm. I reduced power on the left engine to prevent the asymmetry from making a spin out of control, then carefully increased it, keeping the plane coordinated. Seconds later, which seemed like hours, the right engine recovered. The water had been expelled, combustion re-established. The comforting roar of both engines returned, but I knew we couldn't count on luck a second time. "We got to get out of here, now!" I spoke with urgency. I looked at the radar again, desperately searching for a gap, any opening in the wall of storms. And then I saw it, a narrow corridor, marked in yellow on the radar instead of red. It wasn't ideal. There'd still be turbulence, but it looked less severe than the other options. I turned the plane sharply in that direction. It wasn't a smooth, coordinated turn. It was an emergency maneuver, banking 35 degrees and pulling 2 Gs of acceleration. Passengers were pressed into their seats. New screams echoed through the cabin, but I had no choice. Every second inside that hell increased our chances of not making it out alive. We entered the corridor. For a few blessed moments, the turbulence decreased from unbearable to simply severe. I seized the opportunity and pointed the plane's nose up, aggressively seeking altitude. We needed to reach 18,000 feet, where we'd finally be above most of the storm. But the hurricane wouldn't let us go without one last fight. When we were at 15,000 feet, we encountered what pilots fear more than anything else: severe wind shear. Within seconds, our 60-knot headwind transformed into a 70-knot tailwind. Our airspeed plummeted dangerously. The wind shear alarm went off in the cabin. "Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear!" The computerized, insistent voice echoed as the plane began to fall. Our climb rate reversed. Now we were descending at 1,500 feet per minute, despite having the nose up and maximum power. I followed the emergency procedure for wind shear, throttles at maximum power, nose up to 15 degrees, and prayed. The plane vibrated, the engines screamed at full power, but we kept descending. 14,500 feet, 14,000, 13,500. We were going back into the storm we'd fought so hard to leave. David was pale, his knuckles white from gripping the panel so hard, but his voice remained steady when he started calling out our decreasing altitude. I couldn't do anything more than I was already doing. It was a matter of aerodynamics versus nature, engineering versus chaos. And for one terrible moment it seemed nature would win. Then, as suddenly as it began, the wind shear ceased. We came out of the downdraft and the plane started climbing again. At first slowly, 100 feet per minute, then 300, then 800. The alarm silenced. Our altitude stabilized at 13,000 feet, and then we resumed the climb. 3 minutes later, we broke through the clouds at 18,000 feet. Sunlight, blue sky above. Below us, a rotating, threatening mass of clouds stretched as far as the eye could see. The hurricane in all its terrible majesty. But we were out. We were alive. We were safe. I looked at David and saw tears running down his face. I reached out and squeezed his shoulder. We didn't need words. We checked all the aircraft systems. Despite everything we'd been through, the 737 had held up. Some minor damage from debris impacts, redundant systems lost from the lightning strike, but the critical systems were working perfectly. That extraordinary machine had saved us. You're witnessing a real survival story from the skies. If you're not already subscribed to Black Box, click that subscribe button now and join the thousands following the most incredible accounts from aviation. I re-established contact with air traffic control on an alternate frequency. The controller's voice was loaded with emotion when he confirmed our position. They'd lost our radar signal when we entered the storm's core and feared the worst. There was hope, but also the silent preparation for the scenario no one wants to face, a plane lost with 189 people on board. I reported our situation. Aircraft in flying condition, everyone on board safe. Some systems damaged, but nothing critical, and enough fuel to continue to our destination. The controller gave us absolute priority, authorizing direct to our normal route and coordinating with control centers ahead to ensure we'd have a clear corridor. With the autopilot finally engaged and systems stabilized, I had my first moment to breathe since we started that race against time. My muscles were tense, my shoulders ached from accumulated tension, and my hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was starting to decrease. But we were flying in calm air, with blue sky above and our route ahead. I made another announcement to the passengers. This time my voice was loaded with emotion I couldn't completely hide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain again. We've left the storm behind. We're in normal cruise at 18,000 feet, in calm air, heading to our arrival airport. I deeply regret the scare and discomfort. You were extraordinary. Our estimated remaining flight time is 2 hours and 40 minutes. You can relax now, the worst is behind us. What happened next took me completely by surprise. Through the slightly open cockpit door, I heard applause. It started with a few people and spread throughout the entire cabin. 189 people applauding, some crying, others laughing with relief. It was the celebration of life, pure gratitude for breathing, flying, moving forward. Jennifer, the veteran flight attendant, entered the cockpit with tears in her eyes. She had 30 years in the career, had flown through storms before, but never anything like that. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for bringing us back." I couldn't respond. My throat was too tight. The flight attendants began assessing the situation in the cabin. Miraculously, considering the violence of the maneuvers and turbulence, there were only minor injuries. Some scrapes from fallen luggage, 2 passengers with severe nausea who needed attention, and an elderly woman with chest pains who we monitored carefully, but which turned out to be a panic attack and not cardiac. It was a miracle, a true miracle. During the following hours of flight, I had time to process what we'd been through. Technically, that takeoff violated multiple safety regulations. Crosswind limits, turbulence limits, minimum weather conditions. We'd exceeded them all. Under normal conditions, it would be grounds for an investigation, possibly even a suspension. But these weren't normal conditions. Staying on the ground meant exposing everyone to a Category 5 hurricane, The airport facilities, however reinforced, were never designed to withstand 280 km/h winds. Windows would shatter, structures would collapse, and 189 people would be completely vulnerable. The decision to take off, however dangerous, was the lesser of two evils. That didn't make it easier to live with the choices I made that day. I put the life of every person on that plane at risk, based on my judgment, my experience, my confidence in the aircraft, and my abilities. And I was lucky, because no matter how much training I had, no matter how good my technique, there were moments in that takeoff and climb where luck was what kept us alive. The engine could have failed completely instead of just fluctuating. The lightning could have hit a critical system instead of just redundancies. The wind shear could have been more severe, pushing us back to the ground before we could recover. There were 1,000 ways that could have ended in tragedy, and only one way to end as it did. When we finally landed at our destination, 3 hours and 10 minutes after that hellish takeoff, it was the smoothest landing of my career. Maybe because my hands were so calibrated after fighting with the controls, maybe because I felt I owed it to the passengers. The aircraft touched the runway like a feather, the reversers engaged perfectly, and we taxied to the gate at a respectful speed. The passengers didn't rush to exit as normally happens. They left slowly, many stopping to shake my hand, hug me, take pictures. A mother with 2 small children told me she'd thought she'd never see her husband again. A businessman, who by his suit and posture must have been used to controlling situations, admitted he'd never felt so much fear in his entire life, but also never felt such admiration for professionals doing their job. A young passenger, who must have been about 20, asked me a question that would stay with me. How did you manage to stay calm? When everything was falling apart, when we seemed to be dying, your voice on the intercom was steady. How? I thought carefully before answering. It wasn't calm, I admitted. It was focus. When you train for years, practice emergencies hundreds of times, your body knows what to do even when your mind is screaming, and there were 189 people counting on me not to panic. So I didn't. But the truth, which I didn't tell him, was more complex. There was absolute terror. There were moments where I thought we'd die, but there's a switch that flips in extreme situations, something primal that makes you function in pure survival mode. You don't think, you act, you don't feel, you execute. And only afterwards, when the danger passes, does the accumulated terror come to the surface. The investigation that followed was extensive. The airline, the Civil Aviation Authority, even international investigators analyzed every aspect of that flight. The black box recordings were examined minute by minute. Every decision was questioned, every maneuver scrutinized. In the end, the conclusion was that we acted appropriately given the extraordinary circumstances. The official report recognized that staying on the ground would have been significantly more dangerous than attempting takeoff. It praised our piloting technique and crisis management, but it also recommended changes in airport evacuation protocols for imminent hurricane situations. The airport we took off from suffered catastrophic damage. The hurricane hit 15 minutes after our takeoff, exactly as predicted. Winds of 285 km/h destroyed hangars, ripped pieces off the control tower, and turned the terminal into rubble. If we'd stayed even inside the aircraft, the chances of survival would have been minimal. The 737 could have been lifted and thrown by the wind, could have been hit by flying debris, could have collapsed onto the engines from the storm's force. The air traffic controllers who cleared us for takeoff were the last to evacuate the tower. They ran down the stairs as windows exploded around them, reaching the underground shelter just seconds before the hurricane completely destroyed the structure. I later learned that the controller who gave us takeoff clearance told his colleagues, "If they don't make it, at least we tried to give them a chance." That phrase haunted me for weeks. A chance. It was all we'd asked for, all we'd received, and we transformed it into survival through skill, teamwork, and yes, a significant amount of luck. I returned to flying 3 weeks later, after completing mandatory psychological evaluations and proficiency checks. On the first flight, my hands were sweating when I saw clouds in the distance. My heart raced when we felt moderate turbulence, something that would never have affected me before. But I kept flying because it's what I do, it's who I am, and also because those 189 people trusted me, and I couldn't let that day destroy not just my career, but my identity. David also returned to flying, but it took longer. He was honest with me. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I always knew there were risks, but that was different. I saw death so close I still dream about it. I respected his feelings. Everyone processes trauma differently. But 6 months later, I received a message from him. He'd completed additional emergency management training and was ready to come back, and he was asking to fly with me again. He said if he was going to overcome that day, he needed to do it alongside who was there, who understood, who shared that experience. We flew together again, and it was cathartic for both of us. We didn't encounter any storms on that flight, but we didn't need to. The fact of being back in the cockpit working as a team, trusting each other, that was the real recovery journey. Today, 4 years later, that flight still defines much of who I am as a pilot. I don't fly with more fear. I fly with more respect. Respect for nature and its devastating power. Respect for the limits of machines, however impressive they may be. Respect for the lives I carry on every flight. I also became an instructor in crisis management and extreme weather situations. I teach new pilots not just the techniques, but the necessary mindset, because technique without the right attitude doesn't save lives, and attitude without technique is just reckless courage. One of the things I always emphasize is never underestimate the weather. Modern instruments, advanced radars, satellite forecasts, they're fantastic tools. But nature is unpredictable and powerful beyond human comprehension. A hurricane doesn't care about your plans, your skills, or your certifications. It simply is, in all its primal force. I've encountered some of those 189 passengers over the years. A passenger recognized me at an airport and introduced me to the husband she married a year after that flight. She said that day made her realize life is precious and too short to wait. The businessman in the suit sent me a letter thanking me and saying he'd completely changed his life priorities after facing mortality so directly. Those interactions remind me that that day wasn't just about flying a plane. It was about 191 lives, the 189 passengers, David and I, all interconnected by 3 crucial minutes where fate hung in a delicate balance. And unlike so many stories in aviation that end in tragedy, this one ended with everyone getting home. I keep with me a photo that a passenger took from the window moments after we broke through the clouds. It shows the bright blue sky above and the dark rotating mass of the hurricane below. Us, a small silver dot in a vast sky, escaping the clutches of one of nature's most destructive phenomena. It's a powerful image, and every time I look at it, I feel a mixture of pride and humility. Pride because we did our job. Humility because I understand how easily it could have ended differently. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to the aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer. Sometimes I wonder, what if we'd waited 1 more minute? What if we'd tried to seek shelter instead of taking off? What if the engine hadn't recovered? If the wind shear had lasted longer? If any of the 1,000 things that could have gone wrong had gone wrong? I don't have answers. I only have the certainty that day, facing impossible choices, we did the best we could. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best is enough. If this story touched you, subscribe to the Black Box channel and turn on notifications. Every week we bring real accounts from pilots who faced the impossible. Leave us in the comments. Would you have made the same decision? Share with someone who needs to know these stories from the skies.